The straw mattress gave a small crack beneath us when she turned her face toward mine. Outside, rain tapped the roof of her father's house, slow and steady, and the wool blanket between us felt heavier than any quilt I had ever carried. Then my bride whispered 7 words so quietly, I almost thought I had imagined them. I am afraid you will stop listening. I was 21 years old. She was 20. We had been married less than a day, and I had spent the whole evening thinking I needed to prove that I was calm, capable, and ready to lead a household. But in that moment, lying fully clothed beside the woman I had promised to care for, I understood that she was not asking whether I could build a barn, work a field, or provide food through winter. She was asking whether her voice would still matter once the wedding was over. That question has followed me for 20 years. My name is Jonas. I am an Amish husband, a father, and the head of a household that has known good years, lean years, births, funerals, disagreements, forgiveness, and more work than I can count. I share these stories because there are parts of our life that outsiders often see only from a distance. If you have ever wondered what trust really looks like inside a traditional marriage, you may understand why those 7 words stayed with me. And as you listen, I would like you to think about this. When was the last time someone close to you needed to know that you were truly listening? The room where we spent that first night was not our own. It was the small upstairs room at her parents' farmhouse, the one with a narrow window facing the orchard. The wedding meal had ended hours earlier, but the smell of roasted chicken, coffee, and damp wool still seemed to follow us upstairs. Below, the house creaked as relatives settled in corners and spare rooms. Someone coughed near the kitchen. A child laughed once and was hushed. There was nothing dramatic about the room. A wooden chair, a washstand, a peg for our clothes, a lantern turned low. The mattress was filled with straw and uneven near the wall. We lay beneath one quilt, with a folded blanket placed between us, as was expected during bundling. We were married, but the custom still carried a message. Patience, restraint, and respect were not supposed to end, simply because vows had been spoken. I thought I understood that. The truth is, I understood the rule better than I understood the woman beside me. Earlier that day, I had stood before our families and made promises in a voice that did not shake. I had promised faithfulness. I had promised to provide. I had promised to guide our home according to our faith. Those were serious promises, and I meant every one of them. But a young man can mean something deeply and still not know how to live it. I believed being a husband meant having answers. My bride needed me to ask questions. For a while after she whispered those words, I said nothing. I could hear the rain and the soft breathing of the house below us. I remember staring at the dark outline of the ceiling beam, trying to decide what a husband was supposed to say. Part of me wanted to reassure her quickly. I wanted to tell her she had nothing to fear, but that would have been easy, and it would not have been honest. So I asked, "Why do you think I might stop?" She did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was steadier. She told me that during our courtship, I had listened because I was still trying to know her. I asked what she thought about a farm, about children, about caring for our parents when they grew old. I wanted her opinion because I hoped she would choose me, but she had watched other marriages. She had seen some husbands begin with questions and end with instructions. She had seen women learn to speak only when spoken to, not because the ordering demanded silence, but because habit had slowly taught them that their words changed nothing. She was not accusing me. That made it harder. She was trusting me with a fear before it had become a wound. I turned my head toward her, though I could barely see her face in the lantern light. I told her I did not want that kind of home. She said, "Then do not only listen when it is easy." That was the one sentence she gave me. She did not explain it. She did not soften it. She let it remain between us with the blanket. The next morning, life began quickly. There were dishes to carry, benches to move, gifts to load, and relatives to thank. By noon, we were already speaking about practical things, where the flowers should be kept, which cow needed watching, how much lamp oil remained. The ordinary work of marriage arrived before either of us had time to feel married. For the first few months, I remembered her words often. I asked her opinion about small matters. I waited for her answer. I tried not to interrupt. I believed I was doing well. Then came our first winter. We had less money than I had admitted to myself. A repair on the barn roof had cost nearly twice what I expected. One horse went lame. Feed prices rose. I began waking before 4 in the morning and returning after dark with mud frozen around my boots. I was tired, embarrassed, and determined not to let her see how worried I was. That was when I first stopped listening. Not all at once. That is rarely how it happens. She told me we should sell a piece of equipment we were not using. I said we might need it later. She suggested asking her brother for temporary help with hauling. I said I would not owe another man. She told me I was becoming short with her. I said I was only tired. Every answer I gave sounded reasonable to me. Together they formed a wall. One evening she set a bowl of potato soup in front of me. The steam fogged my glasses, and I remember the spoon resting crooked on the table because one leg was shorter than the others. She sat across from me but did not begin eating. I asked what was wrong. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "You are hearing words, Jonas. That is not the same." I knew exactly what she meant. The room from our wedding night returned to me so clearly that I could almost hear the rain again. I did not apologize well. I wish I could tell you that I immediately became humble and wise. I did not. At first, I defended myself. I listed the work I had done. I explained the bills. I told her that responsibility was heavy. All of that was true. None of it answered what she had said. Finally, I stopped talking. She told me she was not asking to carry my role. She was asking not to disappear beneath it. That sentence changed the way I understood headship. A man can stand at the front of his household and still fail to see the people behind him. He can make every decision and call that strength. He can provide bread and still create hunger in the room. Leadership without listening becomes loneliness for everyone involved. We sold the unused equipment. It covered most of the roof debt. I asked her brother for help hauling timber. He came the next morning and never once treated me as less of a man. By spring, the horse had recovered, the barn was dry, and our marriage had survived its first hard season. Not because I found every answer, but because I finally admitted that my wife had seen what I could not. Over the years, her warning has returned in different forms. It returned when our first son was born, and I assumed she was simply tired, when what she needed was for me to notice how frightened she was. It returned when my father became ill, and I tried to make decisions alone, because grief had convinced me that silence was strength. It returned when our oldest child questioned whether he wanted the life we had prepared for him. My first instinct was to correct him. My wife's first instinct was to ask what pain sat underneath the question. She was right to ask. There have also been times when she needed to listen to me. Marriage is not a lesson where one person is always wise and the other always wrong. I have carried fears I did not know how to name. I have stood in the barn after midnight, looking at numbers that would not balance. I have worried about my children, my faith, my own temper, and whether the example I gave was strong enough to guide them when I was gone. She has sat beside me through those things. But even now, after 20 years, I have to resist the old temptation to believe that listening is something a man does before he decides what he already planned to do. Real listening costs more than that. It may cost pride. It may change the plan. It may force a man to admit that the person beside him understands a part of the truth he has missed. Some people hear the word bundling and think only about an old custom, a strange blanket, or a rule from another time. When I remember that night, I do not think first about the custom. I think about the trust it created. There was a boundary between us, but there was also safety. My bride could say something difficult because the night was not built around haste. We had nowhere else to go. No task to finish, no room to escape into. We had to lie still and speak plainly. That may be why I remember her whisper more clearly than many louder things that came later. She did not ask me to promise that we would never disagree. We have disagreed many times. She did not ask me to give up responsibility. I have carried it, sometimes well and sometimes poorly. She asked for something simpler and harder. She asked me not to stop knowing her. That is what happens when we stop listening. The person closest to us becomes familiar, and then familiarity becomes assumption. We begin answering questions they have not asked. We begin assigning feelings they have not expressed. We believe we already know what they will say, so we no longer make room for them to say it. A marriage can remain intact while two people slowly become strangers. I have seen that happen. I have come close enough to understand how it begins. These days, my wife and I sometimes sit at the kitchen table after the children have gone to bed. The lamp is low, the house is quiet. There may be mending in her hands or a cup of coffee going cold between us. We do not always speak about great matters. Sometimes she tells me that a daughter is carrying more worry than she shows. Sometimes I tell her that I am uncertain about a decision in the workshop. Sometimes one of us says nothing for several minutes. But I try to remember that silence can be patient, or it can be empty. The difference is whether the other person knows there is room for them inside it. 20 years ago, my bride whispered that she was afraid I would stop listening. I did stop for a time, then she reminded me, and by the mercy of God, I listened before the distance between us became too wide to cross. What I understand now is this: a husband does not honor his wife by merely allowing her to speak. He honors her by letting her words carry weight. That does not mean every decision is simple or that agreement always comes. It means her voice is part of the home, not an interruption to it. The same is true beyond marriage. Children know when they are being managed instead of heard. Parents know when their grown children visit out of duty, but never ask a real question. Friends know when we are waiting for our turn to speak. Listening is one of the quietest ways we tell another person, "You are still here to me." I've forgotten many things from our wedding day. I cannot recall every dish on the table or every hand I shook. I do not remember which relative told the longest story or who left first when the rain began, but I remember the weight of that wool blanket. I remember the rain against the roof, and I remember 7 words spoken in the dark by a young woman who knew what kind of marriage she hoped we could build. I am afraid you will stop listening. I still hear them, and I hope I always will. If stories like this help you understand Amish life from inside the home, you are welcome to subscribe. I will keep sharing the lessons, failures, and ordinary moments that have shaped me as a husband and father. And I would like to ask you one thing in the comments. What is something a person close to you once said that you still hear years later?